The Elrunian Empire stood unchallenged among the stars, a military juggernaut built on a simple philosophy: any life form that resists must be eliminated. For centuries, they had conquered world after world, system after system, subjugating or destroying all who stood in their path. Their technological prowess, particularly in genetic engineering and military applications, had evolved to the point where they could program biological entities into optimal killing machines. On the command station, in Exor Prime, Commander Ronan Vel paced the observation deck, his expression tight with anticipation. Below, through the reinforced viewport, technicians in white hazard suits swarmed around a containment chamber. Inside that chamber was the culmination of decades of research: Project Apex. "Is it ready, Dr. Maras?" Vel asked, not bothering to hide the eagerness in his voice. Dr. Helena Maris, the Empire's leading geneticist, nodded without looking up from her data tablet. "Ketherax is fully operational, all systems functioning at optimal capacity." She spoke clinically, but couldn't suppress the gleam of pride in her eyes. This was her masterpiece, a creature engineered to be the ultimate predator. "Show me," Commander Vel demanded. Dr. Maris tapped a series of commands. The containment chamber's interior lights brightened, revealing the beast within. Standing 3 meters tall, Ketherax was a nightmare made flesh, bone-armored skin that shifted colors with its surroundings, jaws lined with teeth sharp enough to shred titanium, and muscles developed beyond what nature would ever allow. Its sensory organs were cutting-edge biotech, capable of detecting the slightest movement, the faintest scent, the tiniest heat signature. "Beautiful," Vel murmured. "A weapon that cannot be defeated." Behind them, Assistant Dr. Lena Coral bit her lip. She had helped create this monster, had mapped its genetic structure, had watched it grow from embryo to apex predator. But unlike her mentor, she couldn't silence the doubts that plagued her conscience. Was this science or abomination? "The target is on Keveron 9B, Commander Vel continued, turning to face the scientists. "A former military outpost, now designated as a testing ground for Ketherax." "The Shirak Forest," Dr. Maras added, displaying a hologram of dense woodland. "No modern predator has successfully penetrated its depths. Rumors speak of a mysterious scent that pervades the area, though we've found no conclusive evidence." "Nevertheless," Vel said, "the Empire has designated the forest as our target zone. One individual refuses to vacate despite numerous warnings. The perfect test subject." Lena Coral's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her instruments. She wanted to speak out, to question the ethics, but her courage failed her. Instead, she continued monitoring Ketherax's vital signs as the briefing continued. "Tomorrow," Commander Vel announced, "we unleash our apex predator on Shirak Forest, and then we'll see just how unstoppable it truly is." Outside the viewport, stars glittered coldly in the void, indifferent to the monster about to be set loose upon an unsuspecting world. The war room aboard Exor Prime hummed with activity. Holographic displays showed topographical maps of Shirak Forest, atmospheric conditions on Keveron 9B, and biometric readings of Ketherax. Senior officers gathered around the central table, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of the projections. Commander Vel stood at the head of the table, his back straight, his expression severe. "The parameters are simple," he announced. "Ketherax will be deployed at the forest perimeter. It has 48 hours to locate and eliminate the target. Failure is not an option. The Empire's reputation depends on this mission's success." "What if there are complications?" Lena Coral asked, her voice barely audible. Vel's gaze snapped to her, cold and unyielding. "Anyone who impedes this operation will face execution. Is that clear?" The room fell silent. Dr. Maris shot her assistant a warning glance, but Lena couldn't meet her eyes. Instead, she stared at her data tablet, wondering if she should share her concerns about the creature's autonomous neural patterns. There were anomalies in the latest scans. Nothing critical, but unusual nonetheless. "Prepare Ketherax for transport," Vela ordered. "We jump to Keveron 9B in 6 hours." The transport process was meticulous. Ketherax was secured in an isolation chamber, its massive form eerily still behind the containment field. Its yellow eyes reflected the red warning lights, betraying no emotion, no awareness of its purpose. To the security personnel who flanked the chamber, weapons at the ready. It was just a weapon, albeit one with teeth and claws. Lena noticed something as she monitored the creature's vital signs during the loading procedure. Tiny fluctuations in heart rate, subtle changes in respiration, signs of confusion, anxiety. She made a note in her records but said nothing. Dr. Maris would dismiss it as irrelevant. The jump ship Aurora's Wrath emerged from hyperspace above Keveron 9B, a verdant planet with small oceans and several river deltas. The vessel descended through the atmosphere, its stealth systems engaged, and touched down precisely 1 kilometer from the edge of Shirak Forest. "Deployment sequence initiated," the ship's AI announced. From the command center aboard in Exer Prime, Commander Vel watched the live feed. "Release the beast," he ordered, his voice transmitting across light years. "And await confirmation of a target elimination." The isolation chamber opened with a hydraulic hiss. Ketherax emerged slowly, its adaptive camouflage immediately responding to the environment. As it stepped onto the forest floor, sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on its armored skin. For a moment, the creature simply stood there, absorbing sensory data. Then it emitted a series of ultrasonic pulses, scanning for scents, movements, heat signatures, anything that would lead it to its prey. Minutes passed. Ketherax remained motionless. In its neural processors, a warning flashed. Ancestral survival response triggered. The beast detected chemical residue emanating from deeper in the forest, something its genetically engineered instincts recognized as dangerous. On an Exor Prime, Commander Vel frowned at the display. "Why isn't it moving?" he demanded. Dr. Maris studied the telemetry data. "It appears to be hesitating." "Impossible," Vel snapped. "You assured me it was programmed to kill without hesitation." "It is," Dr. Maris insisted, though doubt crept into her voice. "Perhaps there's an environmental factor we didn't account for." As night fell on Keveron 9B, Ketherax still had not advanced more than a few hundred meters into Shirak Forest. Its tracking signal remained stationary, a blinking red dot on Commander Vel's display that mocked him with its immobility. "Something is wrong," he growled. "And I want to know what." Deep within Ketherax's engineered mind, a conflict raged. Primary directives commanded it to locate and eliminate the target, a simple human living at the forest's edge. But ancestral warning signals screamed caution. The chemical markers it detected were identical to those that had once spelled doom for its genetic forebears. The Thanatrus species, now extinct because they lacked the survival instinct to avoid such dangers. Fragments of genetic memory surfaced, entire packs of Thanatrus collapsing after exposure to airborne compounds, their nervous systems shutting down in agony. These weren't Ketherax's memories. It had never existed before the laboratory, but they were encoded in the salvaged DNA that formed its biological foundation. Self-preservation warred with programmed purpose. The creature took another tentative step forward, then froze as a new wave of chemical markers washed over its sensory organs. Meanwhile, 5 kilometers deep in the forest, Miles Hawk rose with the dawn. His cabin, constructed from salvaged materials and local timber, sat in a small clearing. Solar panels and a modest wind turbine provided power, while a greenhouse attached to the south wall supplied fresh vegetables. It wasn't luxurious, but it was home, had been for 5 years now. Miles checked his perimeter sensors as he did every morning. Motion detectors, gas analyzers, thermal imaging grids, all clear. He took a deep breath of the morning air, savoring the metallic tang that permeated Chirac Forest, a tang that kept most predators, and most people, far away. He hadn't always been a hermit. Once, he'd been Lieutenant Miles Hawke, biochemical warfare specialist for the Imperial Military Research Division. He had helped develop some of the most devastating chemical weapons in the Empire's arsenal before the ethical implications became too much to bear. His expertise in virus research had made him valuable to the Empire, but had ultimately driven him away from it. Now, he lived in exile, studying how to rehabilitate land contaminated by the very weapons he had helped create. The irony wasn't lost on him. Miles was checking a remote sensor array 200 meters from his cabin when the first anomalous reading appeared. Something large had entered the forest perimeter during the night, something that triggered multiple alarm categories simultaneously. "What have we here?" he murmured, adjusting the sensor's sensitivity. The readings were bizarre. A life form with a thermal signature like nothing he'd seen before, moving with cautious deliberation, almost as if testing the environment. He packed his toolkit and headed toward the disturbance, hand resting on the neutralizer spray canister at his belt. After 5 years of solitude, he'd learned never to take chances. Back at the forest's edge, Ketherax lumbered in circles, unable to commit to either retreat or advance. Its programming demanded action, but instinct screamed danger. The conflict manifested physically, muscles twitching, claws extending and retracting, skin color shifting erratically. On Enexer Prime, Commander Vel's patience had run out. "Override its autonomous functions," he ordered. "Force it deeper into the forest." 2 technicians accessed Ketherax's neural interface, sending low-level electrical stimuli directly into its bloodstream. The creature convulsed, its massive frame shuddering under the invisible assault. "Increase power," Vel commanded. The technicians complied, but Ketherax only curled inward, its breathing shallow, its muscles rigid with resistance. Miles continued his careful approach toward the anomalous readings. As he moved deeper into the forest, he ran his hand along the moss-covered trees, feeling the familiar texture. The chemical residue was stronger here, remnants of weapons testing from decades ago. He understood now why the intruder wasn't advancing. The lingering compounds were triggering survival instincts. "Whatever you are," he whispered to the unseen visitor, "you're smart enough to recognize danger. But are you smart enough to leave before it's too late?" Memories surfaced unbidden. His work in the labs, the acceptable casualty calculations, the day he finally walked away. If the Empire knew he was here, they would hunt him down, not just for desertion, but because his continued existence was proof that their reach wasn't absolute. The sensor in his hand beeped softly. The intruder was close now, just beyond the next ridge. Miles moved with practiced stealth, each step calculated. If this creature was what he suspected, another of the Empire's bioengineered monstrosities, then it was incredibly dangerous. But the fact that it hadn't penetrated deeper into the forest suggested something even more concerning. The chemical traces in Chirac were potent enough to frighten even an apex predator. Commander Vel paced the command center, his fury palpable. "It's been 24 hours, he snarled. "Half our allotted time wasted because this beast refuses to do what it was created for. The data shows neurological resistance to our commands," Dr. Maris reported, her professional demeanor cracking under the strain. "It's almost as if Ketherax is afraid." "Impossible!" Vel slammed his fist onto the console. "You told me fear was engineered out of its genetic makeup." "It was," Dr. Maris insisted. "But there must be some environmental factor triggering ancestral survival responses we couldn't anticipate." Lena Coral worked silently at her station, analyzing the atmospheric data from Chirac Forest. There was something familiar about the chemical composition, something she had seen before in her studies. When realization dawned, she nearly gasped aloud. The forest contained traces of neurotoxin sigma-9, a compound specifically designed to incapacitate apex predators. The pieces fell into place. Miles Hawke, the forest's sole inhabitant, had been a biochemical warfare specialist. This wasn't coincidence, it was strategy. "Implement electromagnetic frequency stimulation," Vel ordered. "I want that creature moving within the hour, or heads will roll." The technicians deployed a neural compression wave generator, hoping to force Ketherax to comply through sheer pain. The creature's muscles spasmed, its armored skin rippling with distress. But still, it resisted, refusing to venture deeper into what its instincts identified as certain death. Lena worked feverishly, collecting samples of the forest's chemical residue for analysis. Her portable lab confirmed her suspicions. Sigma-9 was present in concentrations high enough to trigger neurological shutdown in creatures like Ketherax. Miles Hawke had effectively created a sanctuary protected by the Empire's own weapons. Commander Vel's patience finally shattered. "Prepare for direct intervention," he ordered. "I'll personally escort Ketherax into the forest if necessary." A squad of elite soldiers deployed to Keveron 9B, armed with electromagnetic prods and neural disruptors. They surrounded Ketherax, forcing it toward the dense tree line with bursts of excruciating pain. The creature roared, a sound that shook the forest canopy. But when it crossed the threshold into the deeper woods, it immediately froze again, clinging to the massive tree trunks as if anchored. Miles, watching from a distance, saw the flashes of blue energy. He understood what was happening now. Donning his gas mask and activating his chemical detector, he moved purposefully toward the confrontation. It was time to meet the Empire's latest creation face to face. The heart of Shirak Forest was a place of primeval beauty. Towering trees draped with luminescent moss, fungi that pulsed with bioluminescence, and the constant symphony of native insects. But now that serenity was shattered by the standoff between man and monster. Ketherax crouched among the massive roots of an ancient tree, its armored back bristling with spines, its yellow eyes tracking every movement. Across a small clearing, Miles Hawke advanced slowly, flashlight in one hand, neutralizer canister strapped to his back. Behind the creature, Commander Vel and his squad had taken position, weapons trained on both the beast and the man. "Fire if it moves toward the target," Vel ordered, his voice tight with tension. The soldiers shifted nervously, fingers hovering over triggers. No one spoke. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Miles stopped 30 meters from Ketherax. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his empty hand in a gesture of peace. "I don't want to kill you," he said, his voice calm despite the danger. Inside Ketherax's mind, conflicting imperatives waged war. Primary directive: eliminate target. Survival warning: Sigma-9 detected. Lethal threat present. The creature's muscles twitched with indecision, its breathing ragged. "You're not just a weapon," Miles continued. "You have the instinct to survive. Back away if you want to live." "Kill him!" Commander Vel shouted from behind. "He's interfering with the mission!" Ketherax roared, a sound that reverberated through the trees and sent small creatures scurrying for cover. Its massive claws dug into the forest floor, tearing up roots and soil. For a heartbeat, it seemed ready to lunge at Miles. But then, something unprecedented happened. Within its engineered brain, a question formed. Why should I kill one who poses no threat to my existence? The directive to eliminate pulsed against the warning of Sigma-9. The probability of survival, if it attacked, approached zero. In a blur of movement too fast for human eyes to track, Ketherax spun away from Miles and bounded deeper into the forest, away from both the human and the chemical threat. Blood spattered the ground where a soldier's panicked shot had grazed its flank. "After it!" Commander Vel screamed, his face contorted with rage. "Shoot it down!" But Ketherax had already vanished into the undergrowth, its adaptive camouflage rendering it nearly invisible among the dappled shadows. "Deploy electrical traps and shock barriers," Vel barked into his communicator. "Block all forest exits." Miles watched the chaos unfold from a safe distance, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had won this silent conversation with the apex predator, not through force, but through the universal language of survival. In the aftermath of Ketherax's flight, Shirak Forest gradually returned to its normal rhythms. Birds resumed their calls, insects their endless buzzing. Nature, as always, adapted to the disruption and moved on. Lena Coral processed her samples of Sigma-9, running real-time analysis that confirmed what she had suspected. The chemical concentration was sufficient to override Ketherax's kill directives. She compiled her findings into an urgent report for the Imperial Council, knowing it might mean the end of her career, or worse. Ketherax continued to move through the forest, maintaining a safe distance from the danger zone. Its survival instinct, once awakened, now operated at the highest priority level, superseding all programmed commands. It was learning, adapting, becoming something its creators never intended, autonomous. Aboard an Exer Prime, Commander Vel faced brutal questioning from his superiors. The mission, so carefully planned, had collapsed into embarrassing failure. "How did Ketherax fail against a single, unarmed target?" demanded Admiral Thorne of the Imperial Council. "It didn't fail," Lena Corral interjected, stepping forward with her data. "It made a rational choice based on survival probability." She presented her evidence: the Sigma-9 traces, the historical records linking Miles Hawk to biochemical countermeasures against apex predators, the biological response patterns from Ketherax. "The forest was effectively weaponized against our creation," she concluded. "Miles Hawk turned our own technology against us." The Empire, faced with undeniable evidence of their miscalculation, had no choice but to withdraw, rather than risk further embarrassment. They would regroup, reassess, perhaps develop a new predator immune to Sigma-9. But for now, they had been outmaneuvered by a single man with the right knowledge. Ketherax, the apex predator with survival instinct disease, eventually left Shirak for other forests, ones free of Sigma-9 residue. It found new ways to survive, diversifying its diet, avoiding human settlements, learning the rhythms of its new home. The last images captured by Imperial drones showed it as a shadowy figure disappearing into the mist, both fearsome and alone. Miles Hawk returned to his simple life, tending his garden and repairing his machines. The scorch mark on his jacket reminded him of his deadly encounter with the Empire's latest weapon. He knew they might return someday with something new, something deadlier, but he would be ready. In her quarters aboard an Exer Prime, Lena Coral made a decision. She would no longer serve the Empire's military agenda. Instead, she would redirect her research toward ecological restoration, using her knowledge to heal rather than harm. She began drafting a transfer request, knowing it might be denied, but determined to try nonetheless. Dr. Maras, confronted with the limitations of her unethical science, published a confidential report recommending that the Empire reconsider its approach to bioengineered predators. "Even the most perfect weapon," she wrote, "cannot overcome the fundamental drive for self-preservation." The Elrunian Empire learned a costly lesson. No apex predator could be created without considering the biochemical and environmental factors that might influence its behavior. Ketherax lived on, but forever lost its status as the ultimate killing machine. It had become something else, something unplanned, unpredictable. Miles continued his solitary existence, but whenever anyone threatened to encroach on Shirak Forest, rumors of an invisible protector would spread. The truth remained his secret. Not strength, but knowledge was the ultimate weapon. The Empire might devise new plans to neutralize Ketherax, or capture Miles Hawk. Or perhaps they had learned their lesson and would leave Chirac Forest to its peculiar guardian. Only time would tell. The sunset painted Chirac Forest in hues of gold and crimson as Miles Hawk sat on his cabin porch, sipping tea made from local herbs. 5 days had passed since the encounter with Ketherax and the Imperial forces. The perimeter sensors remained quiet. The Empire had withdrawn completely, at least for now. Miles reflected on the creature they had sent to kill him. There had been something almost magnificent about it, a perfect predator, designed by the finest minds in genetic engineering, brought to its knees, not by superior firepower, but by chemical deterrence, by knowledge. He wondered where Ketherax was now. The tracking algorithms he'd integrated into his sensor network suggested the creature had moved to the northern mountains, far from the Sigma-9 concentration. Was it hunting? Learning? Becoming something beyond its programming? Miles had never intended to stay on Keveron 9B permanently. Initially, it was just a place to disappear, to escape the Empire's reach after his crisis of conscience. But over 5 years, the forest had become home. His work decontaminating the soil, cataloging the native species, and studying how life adapted to chemical residue gave him purpose. It was his atonement for the weapons he had helped create. He set his tea aside and reviewed the data from the day's soil samples. The Sigma-9 concentration was gradually decreasing, a good sign for the forest's health, though it meant his chemical deterrent would eventually fade. He would need to develop new defenses before that happened. Aboard in Exor Prime, Lena Coral's transfer request had been denied. Instead, she was reassigned to a new project analyzing Ketherax's behavioral anomalies. The Empire wouldn't admit defeat. They would learn from their failure and try again. The mistake was using Thanatos DNA as a base, Dr. Maris explained during the project briefing. Their species evolved a heightened sensitivity to neurotoxins after nearly being wiped out by predators using chemical defenses. We'll eliminate that weakness in the next iteration. Lena nodded professionally while taking notes, but her mind was elsewhere. She had secretly transmitted a copy of her Sigma-9 analysis to an underground scientific collective, researchers who believed in ethical boundaries. It was treason. But after witnessing what happened in Chirac Forest, she couldn't remain silent. Commander Vell had been demoted for the mission's failure. As he cleared out his office, he found himself haunted by the memory of Ketherax turning away from its target, defying years of conditioning and genetic programming in an instant. It challenged everything he believed about the Empire's technological supremacy. Deep in the northern mountains, Ketherax had established a territory. It hunted the local herbivores, avoided the few settlements, and gradually adapted to its new environment. But something had changed within its neural pathways. The override of its primary directive had created new connections, new possibilities. Each night, it would climb to the highest peak in its territory and gaze at the stars, sensing somehow that its creators were up there, watching, waiting. The concept of freedom was beyond its vocabulary, but not beyond its experience. It had chosen survival over obedience, and in doing so, had become something unique in the universe, a weapon that refused to fire. As darkness fell over Chirac Forest, Miles activated his night defenses, motion sensors, infrared cameras, chemical detection buoys in the streams. The Empire would return eventually. They always did. But he had time to prepare, to refine his methods. The next confrontation wouldn't be fought with guns or claws, but with molecules and knowledge. He smiled as he locked the cabin door. The Empire had sent their perfect predator to kill him, but instead, they had given him the ultimate confirmation. Even their most lethal creation could be deterred by the right approach. It wasn't strength that had saved him, but understanding. Tomorrow would bring new soil samples to analyze, new defense mechanisms to consider, new entries in his growing database of Keveron 9b's ecology. The work continued, one day at a time, and somewhere out there, Ketherax continued its own journey, from weapon to wild creature, from tool to autonomous being. The stars turned slowly overhead, indifferent to the dramas playing out beneath them. In the grand scheme of the universe, what was one man against an empire? What was one creature's choice against its programming? Everything, as it turned out, everything. 3 months later, the Imperial Science Division convened an extraordinary session. The topic, Project Apex and its unexpected failure. We've analyzed every millisecond of Ketherax's neural activity during the Shirak Forest incident, reported the new project lead, a stern woman who had replaced Dr. Maras. The survival response wasn't a malfunction. It was an emergent property of the creature's integrated systems. The holographic display showed a three-dimensional model of Ketherax's brain, highlighting regions that had activated during the confrontation with Miles Hawk. In simple terms, she continued, we created something too perfect. By incorporating authentic predator DNA and advanced neural networks, we inadvertently gave it the capacity to prioritize self-preservation over mission objectives. Admiral Thorne, who had overseen the project from its inception, looked displeased. Can this be corrected? Yes, but at a cost. We can eliminate the self-preservation instinct entirely, but doing so would significantly reduce the creature's effectiveness in complex environments. It would become predictable, easily trapped or outmaneuvered. Lena Coral, still assigned to the project despite her private misgivings, studied the data with growing fascination. Ketherax hadn't just resisted programming, it had evolved beyond it, making a sophisticated risk assessment that valued its continued existence over blind obedience. There is another option, she suggested, earning surprised looks from her colleagues. Instead of trying to eliminate survival instincts, we could design missions that align with them. Deploy apex predators only in environments where target elimination is the optimal survival strategy. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. It was an elegant solution, but it required abandoning the dream of a perfect killing machine that would obey without question. Admiral Thorne's eyes narrowed. And what of Miles Hawk? He remains a loose end, a symbol of resistance. Let him have his forest, said the project lead with a dismissive wave. We've learned what we needed from this failure. The next generation of apex predators will be deployed to worlds where his chemical tricks won't work. But Lena knew better. She had continued her private research into Sigma-9 and discovered something remarkable. Miles wasn't just using leftover chemical residue. He was actively synthesizing it, improving it, creating a defensive shield that adapted as quickly as the Empire's weapons could evolve. It was a stalemate, for now. But stalemates didn't last forever in the Elrunian Empire. On Keveron 9b, Miles had expanded his operation. The greenhouse now produced 3 times the food, and he had constructed a secondary shelter deeper in the forest, a fallback position if the cabin was compromised. His sensor network extended 10 kilometers in all directions, giving him ample warning of any approach. He had also begun documenting his knowledge, encrypting it on quantum storage drives that he would eventually smuggle off-world. If anything happened to him, others would learn how one man had stood against the Empire and survived. Sometimes, on clear nights, he would spot Imperial surveillance satellites passing overhead, tiny points of light moving unnaturally across the starfield. They were watching, always watching. But as long as he remained in Shirak Forest, surrounded by his chemical deterrents, he was relatively safe. One morning, while checking a remote sensor station, Miles found unusual tracks in the soft earth, massive, clawed prints that could only belong to one creature. Ketherax had returned to the forest perimeter. Miles followed the tracks cautiously, neutralizer spray at the ready. The trail led to a small clearing where the underbrush had been flattened in a rough circle. In the center lay a dead vorkat, a native herbivore, its neck broken cleanly. A gift? A message? Miles couldn't be sure, but the implications were fascinating. Ketherax hadn't just escaped its programming, it had developed new behaviors entirely. He left the vorkat untouched and retreated to his cabin. That night, the perimeter sensors detected large movement at the exact spot where he'd found the offering. When he checked the next morning, the vorkat was gone, replaced by a cluster of bioluminescent fungi that didn't grow naturally in that part of the forest. A trade, an exchange. Miles collected the fungi carefully, analyzing them in his lab. They contained compounds that could enhance his Sigma-9 formula, making it more persistent in the environment. Whether Ketherax understood this or was simply engaging in primitive trade behavior was impossible to determine, but it raised profound questions about what the creature was becoming. On Inexor Prime, Lena Coral received an anonymous data packet through the scientific underground. It contained a detailed analysis of Ketherax's ongoing evolution, tracked through wildlife cameras and environmental sensors on Keveron 9b. The apex predator was changing. Its hunting patterns showed evidence of planning, of strategy beyond instinct. It had begun creating caches of food, building rudimentary shelters against the mountain storms. Most remarkably, it had started marking its territory not just with scent, but with arrangements of stones and broken branches, primitive symbols that warned other predators away. Lena compiled the data secretly, adding it to her growing file on emergent intelligence in bioengineered organisms. Someday, when the time was right, she would publish it all, exposing the ethical implications of creating sentient weapons. The Elrunian Empire continued its expansion across the stars, conquering worlds, subjugating species. But Shirak Forest remained untouched, a tiny pocket of resistance in a galaxy dominated by military might. And, in the northern mountains of Keveron 9b, a creature designed to kill without question continued its improbable journey towards something resembling freedom. The next confrontation would come eventually. The Empire never forgot a defeat, never abandoned a target. But when they returned to Keveron 9b, with their new weapons and strategies, they would find not just Miles Hawk waiting for them, but something they had never anticipated, their own creation, now aligned with their enemy. The apex predator bred to kill had made its choice, not through emotion or moral reasoning, but through the cold calculation of survival. And in that calculation, Miles Hawk, the human who understood its nature, who respected its power, who offered cooperation instead of dominance, represented a better chance at continued existence than the masters who saw it as nothing more than a weapon to be wielded and discarded. As the seasons changed on Keveron 9b, as the Empire plotted and Miles prepared, as Lena gathered her evidence and Ketherax evolved, one truth became increasingly clear. The most dangerous entity in the universe wasn't the perfect predator or the unstoppable empire, but the individual with the knowledge to turn strength against itself. The stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the dramas below, but somewhere among them, a new story was being written, one where the weapon refused to strike, where the prey became partner, where knowledge overcame force. A story where, just once, the forest stood stronger than the empire,